Hello, Jim. Hi to all the viewers. So here we have a special episode of Tips and Tactics, and I have with me uh, Jim Bishop, who has his own blog, and I bookmarked it because I find it full of valuable information. So in the last video that I did a horrible mistake, and Jim agreed to join me and explain a couple of things about vehicular traffic in ASL. So let's take it away, Jim. We're both in a vassal room, and I put up the example that I showed in the previous video. I'm just gonna enlarge it here. So basically, what I did was I wanted to demonstrate vehicular bypass. Um, what do you call it exactly?
You call
Oh,
it
look,
sleaze freeze is what most people go.
a sleaze freeze. That's great. So what I did
That's what
was
most people.
a
I say
sleaze
that's what most people call it, but as you correctly identified, it's target selection limits.
target selection limit. So what I did was I started for one, and I've read your blog two times now. So now, although correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, if
hmm
I started for one, so now I am a moving vehicular target, but I still do not qualify for the case J, correct? Because I haven't
So
moved
no,
in. No?
no. So that's what the why I sort of commented on Facebook on your post is because there's some confusion around this, and it's you're not alone. I've been playing ASL for a long time, and I bet I've answered this question every 6 months or so, if not more. Usually new players coming on and who are confused by it. The majority of what you're looking for is buried in, not buried, but it's in C.8. So those dot rules that are at the start of the chapter C.
Hmm.
And so what you're looking for is there's like four states that your vehicle can be in. And one of them, quote unquote, moving, is not even really well defined in the rule book. So we'll start with that.
Okay.
So moving is anything that's spending movement points or movement factors. So unless you're using some form of impulse movement or moving as a stack, there can only ever be one thing at a time moving. Once you say start for one, that AFV becomes moving, right? It's spending movement points. When you're done and you say I'm moving on to the next unit, that unit is no longer moving, right? And don't confuse the word moving with the word moving vehicular target because they're not the same thing. And they're not even, and it's just confusing when people think of it that way.
So if I
So in your case, at the beginning of this turn, as the Vassal Bore sits right now,
Mhm.
that vehicle is not covered with a motion counter, so it's not a moving target. Because it's not covered with a motion counter, it's spent a stop movement point since its last start movement point, so it is stopped. So to look at that vehicle as it lays on the board right now, it's a stopped vehicle. That's it. That's all you would say. Stop vehicle. Case J would be an A. And if you were within point blank range, right, whatever, it's I think case L,
Mhm.
it could apply because you're stopped and you're not moving.
Even though I expended one
So
movement point.
so no, you haven't spent one movement point yet. So we're just talking about as the board lays. Then once you spend one movement point,
Hmm.
you become right. Uh, we've talked about it earlier. A non-stopped vehicle is a vehicle that's spent a stop, or that has spent a start since its last stop. So once you spend a start, you become non-stopped.
Okay.
But because you haven't entered a new hex or bypassed a new hex side, you're not a moving vehicular target yet. So I'm going to do something here on Vassal. If I click on your vehicle and I say start for one, turn rotation two, turn rotation three, turn rotation four, turn rotation five, turn rotation six, turn rotation seven. I spent seven movement points, and I have yet to become a moving vehicular target because I haven't left my hex.
Okay.
If I start for one, unbutton, shoot a smoke dispenser, rotate, pivot 15 different directions or whatever, until I enter a new hex, I'm still not a moving vehicle.
Okay.
And so one of the points I tried to make in my blog post, which is, you have to be careful about how you pivot when you're in a hex because it subjects you to multiple shots, perhaps across multiple target aspects, without ever benefiting from case J.
Okay, so
So the correct way to say it, once you started for one, your vehicle became non-stopped, and you were correct, case J does not apply. Or sorry, case J does not apply yet.
okay. So he's non-stopped. Now he moves. He moves. Well, one to start, two into P4.
Correct.
At this point, the state is he's moving.
That's correct.
Okay. So from your perspective, what's the difference between moving and a moving vehicular target?
Okay, so let me rephrase that. He's moving because he's still, so let me back up a little bit, be very pedantic here.
Okay.
He's moving because he's spending his movement points,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
So as he continues to spend his movement points for the duration he's spending them, he is moving because it's conducting that's another way to think about it. He's conducting its movement phase, right? So it's going through the steps on the ASOP covered by the movement phase for that particular counter or group of counters. He's a moving vehicular target because he's moved into a new hex. And so now case J would apply if I were to shoot him with a gun or something like that.
Totally agree. So he spent one to start,
Two.
two to go in there, and he could have very well announced more than he needed to for any reason to move into this hex. It doesn't necessarily have to expend one additional point. If he so desires, he can declare more, correct?
Um, Once he gets into the hex, he can declare it having spent more. And the reason why I'm being a little pedantic about that is because some folks will believe that I could say I want to move into the next hex for 30, and that's too much, so I'm going to burn off the rest of my movement points in the particular hex of P4. You can only spend the excess once you get into the hex,
Okay.
but you have to actually be in the hex to spend it. And that becomes important when you start talking about sleaze freeze and stuff like that, because when you get to this point down to the end here where you actually freeze your target, you may not want to end in that hex. You may want to try to have your cake and eat it too by saving yourself a movement point and then trying to remain in motion. And if there's ways to do that properly, but then there's also ways that force you into a position where you either have to pay the stop, which is unfavorable to the AFV in close combat, or move on to Tango 2 and get away from what you were trying to do, which was freeze that particular space.
All right.
So there's things that you kind of got to think about when you do this.
So two to there.
Correct.
3,
Correct.
4,
Correct.
5, 6 to
Correct.
change covered arc.
Okay.
Okay, now at this point, some viewers remarked that spraying fire is my friend.
For your units, yes, it could be.
For the
I'm
Russian
not sure what's underneath here.
Okay.
Yeah, what's underneath here?
Let's get it off. So we
Okay,
have.
so in this particular case, the only spray fire you have is with the machine gun, right? And the reason for that is because underlying range is what amounts to spray fire. So your guy could elect to spray fire to lay down residual here and here. The shot here would be 16 because it's double. Well, I'll take it back. The shot here would be 8. So it's double for point blank, then half for spraying power. This one right here would be 8 or 16, half for spraying and then half for area. So it would be 4. And so this hex would leave 4 residual. This hex would leave 2. Obviously, it couldn't affect the tank. But what that does for you, and we'll put this down for now. Let me make sure I got these right as well. Come on, increase. Increase. Oh, I'm having a hard day here with this. So 8 would be 16 half to 8. 8 half to 4. Yeah, so that's right. So the RFPs are correct. And what that does is now later when you want to run these infantry up adjacent to here to try to hit them close combat or point blank them, they would have to potentially run through these residual firepower.
Potentially. So let's see how you did the residual firepower. You did point blank fire.
Correct.
Point blank fire, halved for area, right?
Correct.
Because
So
that's
it's point blank fire. point blank fire in both hexes,
Mm-hmm.
which turns this in so you can only use the machine gun for the spray fire because you don't have underlying
Correct.
range on your partisan squad here. So this becomes 16 and 16.
Mm-hmm.
Now this one gets halved for area fire. This one gets halved for spray fire.
Mm-hmm.
This one gets halved for spray fire and then halved again for area fire. So the attack against this hex would be an 8 flat, or 8 minus 2 if you wanted to be technical with the leader. And the attack against this one would be a 4 flat.
Okay, and why doesn't this hex get halved for area fire as well? Because we can't fire an NG.
Because
Okay. Yep.
because this location has a unit in it, and this location doesn't.
Okay.
And by rule, when a location doesn't have the area, it gets halved a second time for spray fire or for area fire.
Okay. But an AFE is not a legitimate target for the H and G on the IFT. So,
Well, it's a legitimate target. It's just not one it can hurt.
okay. All right. Fair enough.
Right? If it were CE, you could obviously hurt it, but it is a legitimate target. It just can't hurt it.
Okay. All right. I I understand that. Okay. And then what I did is 1, 2, 3,
You're
4,
at
5,
8 there.
6, 8, and then 10 into here, and using vehicular bypass.
Right.
And now what can ensue and is close combat
Looks like
or
that.
reaction fire, correct?
So in your what could happen with reaction fire here if they wanted, but the defender probably wouldn't want to take it at this point because you're still in motion, and the +2 DRM is not necessarily great for them because your vehicle is non-stopped. If you look at your close combat chart, you'll see that the chart says motion/non-stopped.
Correct.
We already know this isn't motion because it's not over a motion vehicle, and as he's non-stop right now, may not be the time to do it.
So I said,
You might want to.
yeah, I said
In
10.
your original video, yeah, you should stop for 10. And at that point, yes, I probably would want to do some close combat.
So
And so for that, gets into the part where your second errors were in that original post. This is a full squad and not a half squad for starters. So its CCV is 5. And then the leader makes it 6. And then the DRMs, once he became stopped, motion doesn't apply as you asserted in your original video because he's not covered with a motion counter, so he can't be in motion. It's a matter of whether or not he's stopped or non-stopped. And once you spent the 1 movement point to stop, he became stopped. So that +2 DRM that you're calling on didn't apply. So now you have CCV of 5. Leader makes it 6. Street fighting bonus always applies to a vehicle that's in bypass of a location if attacked from a unit within that location, as we have here. So that'd be -1 for bypass street fighting and then -2 for the leader. So this would be a 6-3 attack against that vehicle, looking to try to get a 6. So with a -3, it would mean a 9 would immobilize that vehicle, an 8 would wreck that vehicle, and 6 would burn it because 6 minus 3 would be a final 3, and 3 is less than or equal to half of 6.
okay. So the
And that would be on first fire. So assume you survive that first fire attack. I could now CC reaction fire a second fire time because again in your video you said delay the rest. So I attacked once on 10. I could attack again on 11 with CC reaction fire. The difference now is this guy's firepower is halved, and I can't use street fighting because you only get it when you don't get it when you mark first fire. So this would be a CCVF 4, leader of 5, still get the -2. So this would be a 5 -2 attack. On a 7, I would immobilize you. On a 6, I would kill you. And on I think a 2, I would burn you. Yeah, 2, I would burn you.
okay.
So I would have 1 chance for a 9 and 1 chance for a 7 to eliminate this tank. So this tank is going to, at the very least, be immobilized somewhere about 70% of the time as you played it here.
Okay. So basically, to make a long story short, the mistake that I did was I called the stop expenditure. Instead, what I should have done, well, I shouldn't have charged a hex with a 9 -2 leader with it. I should have marked it to improve my chances. I should have marked it with a motion counter.
So you could do that, but you'd have to do it again. This gets back to the way I was talking earlier about it. So the way you played it here, you went bypass for 9,
Hmm.
right? So that leaves you 5 movement points. How are you going to use those movement points? Because you can't. A tank has to use all of its movement points in any given turn by rule. So once you did 10 here, you couldn't just say I'll remain in motion.
Oh,
You could say I'll enter the hex for 13 and remain in motion, right? I'll enter the hex for the remainder of my movement points and remain in motion. That's legal.
okay.
You could say you can't even you can't even bypass because you're already in this hex. You can't say bypass for the remainder of my movement points because you got 5 left, and you can only spend extra movement points when you enter the hex and you're already in the hex. So the question becomes, how do you burn off those movement points? You can't delay because to delay you have to spend a stop movement point. You can't spend a delay movement point while you're in a moving vehicle. And what you're trying to avoid doing is stopping in this location, because once you stop, you open up yourself to that -3 change, a -3 swing in the die rolls. So that's where it becomes very. It's fun to watch people who are first time struggling with bypass like this, because a lot of the way to defend against it is to know the way to properly do it, right? If you come in here for 10, right? So here's what happens a lot of times. Somebody will come like this, okay, I'm going to bypass there for 12, and then I'm going to try for the smoke discharger. They have a smoke dispenser on a 6. They go in, they roll the dice, and they roll a 7. Well, when the 7 is rolled, I haven't got any movement. I didn't get smoke. I didn't spend the movement point. How do I spend that one last movement point? Right? And I'm sure you've seen that happen in games where someone has done it to you. And most times people just say, well, go ahead and put the motion counter and I'm done, and they just let it go on. But the reality is that you can't do that. So if I don't want to get freeze like this, I don't want to get subject to target selection limits, I say, well, how do you spend the last movement point? And the only way you can do it is you have one of 2 options at this point. You can say 13, remain in motion there, or you can say stop. And if you say stop, then I can attack you. I mean, I can attack you while you're moving, but I'd rather attack you while you're stopped.
So the trick is do the math in this hex, expand
Correct.
expand everything except the amount of movement points you need to get into bypass, and then you're done.
Well, you can do that, or what most people will say is I'll spend the rest of my movement points and bypass there, and that's legal, right? And I don't have to do any counting.
Huh.
Right. Most folks will. I've never met anybody who would say, well, how many movement points is that? If it matters, you can calculate it, because maybe I've got a gun up here that goes on a raft here and that can hit this however many hit movement points that you spent there. But the reality is that the number of times that happens is not very often.
Okay.
But that's the way you should have. That's the way I would have done it if I wanted to freeze this position. I personally would have stopped here for 10, fired my machine guns, and if I break this unit or somehow smash up the guy with the machine gun, then I can move this vehicle on and go do something else. I don't have to freeze your position, because I've done everything I wanted to do by getting rid of it. And then if that doesn't, then I would start for 1 and then spend the rest of my movement points remaining in bypass.
Okay.
I might also try an SD here. Because if I can get the SD here, then I can move to the south of that and allow the smoke to cover my approach.
Now, for the record, I've never put a squad, a multi-man counter, in close combat with a 9-2 leader ever intentionally. Okay. I've never done that.
I've done it. Sometimes there's a time to do that. I mean, there may be a time to do that. If he burns his vehicle, that's almost as good, because he's still shooting at a +3 smoke, right? Because this vehicle will be +2 in his own location. And so if he burns it, you're actually not, I mean, other than the fact that you may want the AFV, or you may need it for to fulfill the victory conditions, if he burns it and provides smoke in that hex, it allows this guy the freedom to move around a little bit.
Okay.
So, I mean, it just depends. There's times when you may want the burn. You may run a half track into that hex and say, please burn it, because that's an additional -2 for an open top vehicle. For the love of God, make it burn.
Mind if I show you the actual gameplay where I used Sleaze Freeze, and it's the first time I've used Sleaze Freeze against an opponent.
So first, let's finish this. Let's finish this example up right here.
Sure.
And only so far as that. Now, if this guy right here, typically what happens is you want this guy to close on this location, and
Right.
he can go 1, 2, 3. Now he's got problems, right? Because of his residual here. If he goes into this hex, it's a 4-2. If he goes into this hex, he can make it a 2 flat if he CXs and uses his shell holes. But it gives you an opportunity to roll on the dice against him. And anytime you're rolling dice, it's an opportunity for you to bust something up, right?
Oh
And so
yeah.
that's why that residual is your friend. Now he could have done a double time and said, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and avoided that altogether. In which case he's going to try to break this up here, but then that's just presents its own problems because it's a 9-2 sitting in a +2 tem, and I don't really have the greatest shot. And then if for some strange reason I decide to advance into close combat with this guy, with my CX guys, now I got a +1 modifier my ambush die roll for being CX. I got a +3 modifier for a tank, or +2 for an AFV in my hex, a +3 for an AFV that's buttoned up in my hex. So it's a +4 to your -2. I think there's only a 6 and a 1. 6 and a 1 might represent you rolling a 6, me rolling a 1 might represent no ambush. You're pretty dang close. I have to think about that one a little bit, but the odds of not ambushing me are almost impossible. And then you have the option, right? You can try to kill this vehicle. I have a covering infantry unit, but that's kind of silly. Kill this guy. If you get, you have a 1-to-1 -3, -4 against him. If you kill him on a 9, right? Then he can't attack back. The vehicle can attack you. He's got a 5 firepower machine gun coaxially. So that's two to your 5, 6 for you. So he's going to attack you 1-to-4 back. Chances are he's not going to hurt you. And then you got the ambush, so you just withdraw out here, right? And after that, you're probably looking at this, right? This is the most likely outcome. This is your dead pile,
Mm-hmm.
right? And even if it's not dead and still sitting in this hex, you still have got the withdraw out. And now it's your prep fire phase, and you've got a 16 flat at a guy adjacent with a rate fire 2, a rate fire 3.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can just say, you know what, I want to just move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can go 6 with this guy, yeah, 6. All right, and then bink into there.
Okay.
Now I actually can only go 4 with that, but you get the point. I mean,
Yep.
you may only be able to go 4.
Yep.
So, anyways, now you can open up your game now.
Yeah.
That's the principles of what several folks are trying to get at.
The other sleaze tactic I could pull off, I'm not sure if it's a sleaze tactic, is if this tank survives the sleaze freeze, instead of rushing in there, in my next player phase, I can put an up fire. He will get a defensive fire, and as long as he doesn't eliminate the AFV, he can't fire out. And then during the next German player turn, I can put him as a up fire, and I can fire into the hex without the CX detriment. Correct?
Yeah, that if this 9-2 stayed around, but because his vehicle's in motion, he's not locked in melee,
Ah.
and chances are he wouldn't stay there just to hang around. If this vehicle were stopped and
Mm-hmm.
somehow survived, then this unit would be held in melee. That's correct.
All right.
And then you could play the op fire and wait to shoot him till later or whatnot, like you talked about. But as long as this guy's in motion, which is one of those things, like I said earlier, sometimes there's a reason why you leave your guy there, in a stopped space. If this guy's emotional, this guy just backs out. I
Okay.
mean, he could back out like this because of this covered arc space. Your bow machine gun couldn't shoot him. You could try to turn your coaxial machine gun, but then you're adding a +1, +2, minus. It'd be a 2 flat
Hmm.
and worth a while. Or I could just be hardcore and go here. You're still CX. You'd be taking a 6 up 1.
Hmm.
Just depends on how you'd want to go about it.
6 up 2, right?
Well, I would be non-assault moving, assuming I was moving out non-assault movement. You'd have +1 CX, +1 TAM, and then -1 for the non-assault movement.
Okay. Well, let's see if we can load the log, and I'll tell you when it's up, and you can sync to me, I suppose.
Sure.
Load to save game. Oh, graphics glitch here. So if you'd like to sync to me,
Okay. Synchronizing.
and it's at the upper left-hand corner of board 49, around B1.
I'm waiting for it to still sync. Okay, there it goes. Ah, you were the one playing this game.
Yep,
For
there's
left-hand corner. Okay.
yep. Here's Mueller behind a roadblock,
Yep. Yep.
and these are the boys that I'm concerned about. And this hex, um, well, that's my opponent, and he's in smoke right now with 2 acts. Um, so I managed to eliminate him.
Mm-hmm.
My greatest puzzle here is how do I get there safely? Let's see. If we go through the log, I'm prep firing, I'm doing some OBA. This stack was virtually invincible. Every time I would break them, they would get
Rally
heat of
back.
battle and get back into it.
We've all been there.
Yeah, this dude was not so lucky. Um, every opponent I've only played this scenario twice, and every opponent has put the 75 there. Uh, and I don't recall doing an AAR about it. Here's George
So,
taking some sort of fire. I guess
so
this
I'm
is,
just curious
yeah,
because I see the red clicks showing the click between this unit, the 76, and this unit Mueller.
yeah.
Um, is that a shot? Is he taking a shot here?
I don't
I'm
remember.
because there's no LOS, which is why I'm asking. The
Oh,
roadblock is on the hex side between F5, F4, which is effectively a wall there, and so there's no line of sight
to
at
Mueller?
ground level across there. Yeah,
Hmm.
to Mueller.
I
So
thought this would
that
be treated as a wall, so if it's a wall,
it is a it is a wall,
it would be a +2 tem? Because
but Mueller's not in the wall. The wall hex side
oh, okay.
oh, is in the wrong spot. So let me clone this real fast for us, and I'm going to do this. So the wall hex side is between those two arrows
Okay.
because of the way the arrow is pointing. And so Mueller isn't in a hex with a wall hex side, right? It would be like this guy. Picture this as a unit here,
Hmm.
shooting at a unit. Yeah, actually, this is the gun. This is Mueller.
Okay.
That's the same. That's the same situation you have between here and here. The gun is all the way back here. The wall is here, and Mueller's there.
Okay. So for the benefit of the
I'm
wall,
gonna,
Mueller would have
I'm
had
gonna
to
get
be in
rid
the
of.
same hex as the roadblock.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. The arrow points to the hex side the wall is actually at,
Okay.
and the hex side goes from center dot to center dot.
Okay. That's different than the basic game. I come from the squad leader tradition.
Mhm.
So I was the one who made the mistake there. That's mistake number one. Now we're trying to get rid of as many Russians as we can. It's still prep fire phase.
Mhm.
Okay, and what is he doing? Somebody there prep fired. I think it was the tank E. Um, this guy's being invincible. Prep firing all over the place. Movement is around the corner. There it is. Okay, so can I back up?
Mhm.
Okay, this tank is already in motion.
Mhm.
So he'll be doing these Sleaze freeze. And ideally,
Yep.
as soon as I was about to move and expend one movement point, that motion marker should have come off, right?
Correct.
So he's moving. What is he doing there? Okay. Did he assault move? No, something
Yeah, I can't
happened.
tell
Something wrong happened with um, the
with your replay.
with my replay. I what happened was the motion tank here went into this X and
Mhm.
declared a stop and did the sleaze freeze. And then I started
Right.
advancing my infantry from here into there, and it was already covered with smoke. So what he had was a 7.0 liter, a 237, and a heavy machine gun.
Right.
Yeah. So
So
that's
I'm looking at the log replay. Wrote Ken wrote Patsy 7, so he's right. His squad would have to take a Patsy, which it passed with a 7, and he did a CCV 5 plus 2 DRM. His CCV is wrong because it's not a crew. The half squad has a CCV of 3, the leader would be 4 in this particular case. And then if you hit forward on your replay log real quick, one more. Yeah, he rolled a 4. That should have immobilized your tank, and that's why it got put over here. He rolled a 4 thinking that he needed a 5, so he thought he'd eliminated the vehicle. So that's what's happening here.
okay. So technically, this tank is immobilized.
It'd be immobilized there technically, but because you played it as a burn or as an eliminated vehicle, that's why when you're logged, that's why it ends up over here.
Yeah. And then ultimately, once he gets immobilized, he is stopped.
He would be stopped.
Okay.
This guy would then have target selection limits. He didn't place any residual, and you could just run all this infantry right up adjacent to him and try to hurt him in the advancing fire phase.
Now, my poor opponent, this is the first time any other adversary did this to him. So he didn't know what was coming.
Mm-hmm.
He was as shocked as I was when my adversary first did it to me.
Yeah.
The Sleaze freeze.
Right.
I think I don't regret doing the video. Yeah, I made mistakes. Who hasn't?
No,
But
we've all made mistakes.
but at least folks now know. Here's the sleaze freeze. It exists. Here's the rule number. Because
Right.
even when I executed the move, well, poor Ken, of course, I've read the rule book 3 times, or I don't know, maybe one and a half. But who can recall this? Well, at age,
So,
yeah,
so how about this, right? So put this guy back where he was.
okay.
Right, this guy was here in motion.
Hmm.
Put the motion counter on him. So this is smoked up and concealed for intents and purposes.
Hmm.
So rather than even prep firing this guy,
Hmm.
right? And maybe even the same for this guy. I might not have even prep fired them. What if you'd done this instead, trying to get after this guy? So the first thing you would know is what's there. You're really not sure,
Hmm.
right? But you got all these nice little half squads nearby, and you don't have to write cardboard letters home to cardboard moms, right? So why don't you take this guy right here, this half squad, even especially this one with maintaining the prisoners, because if he eliminates your prisoner, you get double CBP,
Hmm.
right? And go bypass one, two, late CX for 5 into his hex, forces him to reveal. He could shoot you. What's the worst case? It's a 628 with a heavy machine gun and a 10 minus 3 liter. Well, he's still shooting out of smoke, so that minus 3 liter just disappears. So it's only the -1 for the non-assault movement. And yeah, 24 down 1 is no way to go through life. But if he kills you, you get double the CVP back. You really don't care. This guy's first fired, and you know what's in there, and anybody else that gets adjacent to him is halved. And now you can start making other decisions, right?
Hmm.
If he breaks it and it survives there, okay, great. Now I've got this. I can go 1, 2, 3 because he doesn't. Assuming that he doesn't have rate, he's got target selection limits himself with a known closer enemy unit on both of these two locations, and you're free to go around the corner. Now, yeah, you have fire and things to consider with, but you're free to make it around this corner. You can armored assault this around the corner. You can take this around the corner and into here, and now you're bypassing this location by fire. And then with guys in his back, most units in ASL get eliminated through failure to route, not through KIAs on the table or close combat. If you break this guy right now, as with the board in this kind of position, he's dead. He's either going to surrender adjacent or he's dead for failure to route.
So
Right?
so again, yeah.
You don't need to take him out with direct fire.
So to sum up, although this in this instance that 7.0 and 237 may have been a more viable target for Sleaze Freeze, there were other alternatives that I could have done to go around and just bypass them. Because basically, my victory conditions is to take this building, take quite a few buildings. So instead of
Right.
freezing my motion here and immobilizing my vehicle there, um, the alternative was to use my half squads for reconnaissance and armor assault around that position.
Yeah.
Uh,
So I'll give you a glimpse. I'll give you a glimpse of a future article that I've got. It'll be posted on the 24th, I think 25th.
okay.
And in it, I talk about what are my quote unquote ASL maxim.
Mm,
They're the things that to me help me analyze a scenario when I sit down to play it and what it might take to win.
mm.
So I look at this scenario here and I see I think it's 3 victory conditions if I remember. Is one of these buildings a victory building? Right, you have to get these victory buildings back here, and I don't know how many of them you have to get because I haven't seen the card in a long time.
So one
But
is
looking at
a
these,
just to sum up, one's a freebie right here because it starts in the German setup. Then you have another one here, 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 there, and there. And I've never won under the
okay,
Germans.
okay, so if you'd like to play it sometime, let me know, and I'll play it as the Germans.
Sure.
So what you have to do is you just have to look and see. You have 7 turns,
Hmm.
and you have to get if you're starting. This is your start line, and then this is your start line like this. So these guys, if they have to get all the way back to here, I'm just going to draw the LOS there because I don't feel like counting. But it's 17 hexes, right?
Hmm.
These guys over here, if they have to get all the way back here, it's 16 hexes, right? So you've got some distance to go in 7 turns.
Hmm.
If you divide 16 into or 7 into 16, you have to average a little more than 2.5 squares or 2.5 hexes forward per turn.
Hmm.
Now, fortunately for you, these are factories, so they don't have floors to clear, so you don't have to consider the verticality of it, right?
Hmm.
If this building has 2 levels, it can take you 2, if not 3 turns to clear it. If it's got 3 levels, it can definitely take you 2 turns, if not 4 turns to clear it, and you have to account for that time, right? So you're kind of lucky you don't have to worry about going up. So you got to get 2.5 hexes forward. Well, all this stuff up here that I just first fired
Hmm.
gave away 2.5 hexes. So now you have to add those 2.5 hexes on to every turn, to a later turn. Somewhere you have to make that time up.
Hmm.
And so there's a fine line between prep firing and moving. And the basic rule of thumb is if you're prep firing is you're losing. I'm not saying that there's not a time to prep fire, but you don't necessarily want to prep fire all that much stuff because it's just wasted material. Especially when you have this many tanks that can move, and each of these tanks have SD5s at least. Like this is an SD7, this is an SD7, right? So these all have smoke on 7. And that smoke can certainly cover your space. This guy could shoot smoke, right? And if he's shooting smoke into here, this guy can he shoot smoke? Let me see this guy, control I. Yeah. So this guy's got S9. So these guys could shoot smoke to cover your infantry's approach and then run your infantry up.
Hmm.
Right? And yeah, you're gonna have chances to get you're gonna have to think about where does this 8-1 set up because I could theoretically break a guy here, I could theoretically break a guy here through where does that guy route to, right? Then you gotta think about where your route paths are gonna be so that I can get everybody back to this 8-1 leader here and get him back into the game on my next turn. Right? But those are the kinds of pacings that you have to think about. If I'm the Russians here and I see all these prep fire counters, I'm very comfortable. I don't think you've put me under that much pressure. If I'm the Russians here and I don't see any prep fires and I see a bunch of smoke all along here, I'm already trying to think about how do I fall back to my next line.
Hmm. Interesting. Interesting.
So that's the thing, right? And those are hard-won tactical lessons, but I find that players who haven't played for long, especially players that are coming from a starter kit space where they haven't necessarily had a lot of veteran mentorship,
Hmm.
because the most quote-unquote veteran ASLers don't play starter kit, not because it's a bad game, because I think it's an excellent game, but it's just different enough from ASL that I have to learn all 36 pages of those rules, and it's different in ways that are unexpected to me. So I just don't know that the newer players learn some of these lessons as quickly as I did. Playing Gary Fortenberry and some of the international players at ASLOC who kicked my teeth in year after year. with games that they had played and lessons that they had learned from the Mark Nixons and the Bill Connors and the Mike McGraths before them, and then the Bill Sislers and whatnot, right? The guys who were the real old schoolers who went to the school of hard knocks and then got to laugh at the new kids that came along, and those new kids came along, got to laugh at me, and now I come along, I get to laugh at you a little bit, right? Not in a derisive way, but just sort of like, yeah, I remember when I did that. Because I think that's the ASL is too complex a game, I think, to learn on your own. And I think the starter kit does a good job of trying to help people bridge that gap by simplifying the game. But there's things like using smoke. There's things like sleaze freeze. There are things that are unintended or maybe even intended in the rules that are used in a tactical way that people that are non-intuitive. And when that happens, people have a hard time understanding them until they see them the first time. And the only way to get that is to play somebody who's used them or seen them themselves and knows how to properly use them and apply them to you.
Okay. Mind if I ask you a question about mines?
No, hope so.
All right. So I figured I'm playing a relatively new player, and I figured that
Good.
the best way to avoid anti-tank mines is to take these vehicles once I cleared the infantry and get them closer to my objectives through vehicular bypass. Um, Ordinarily, right? Is one, is that a good idea? And two, wouldn't I be able as a defender to put an anti-tank mine in this hex, for example, in S7 because there is open ground around it?
So I know you can put anti-personnel mines around it, right?
Hmm.
And moving within it. So like if you had an anti-personnel mines in ours in S7, this unit in the hex adjacent to it could move into S7 without being attacked by the mines. But once he attempted to go to T7, T6, or S5, or even this one, right? Once he goes to any adjacent hex not within that building, he has to move through the open ground portion of that building, and he would be attacked by the mines. So you can do that with things like if this is a dummy stack, you could put mines here, and then you could advance them back and pop them into here, and not be attacked by the mines because they're dummies, and lure the German player into coming through and getting attacked. I can't remember if AP mines can be placed in that same way. I would have to look, to be honest with you. I would assume they can, and if they can, then yeah, he would bypass through here and be attacked. But I don't know offhand without looking at it,
Okay.
without looking at the road.
Mind if I ask you two non-game, well, kind of game-related questions, but you know, general questions.
Sure, go
Um,
ahead.
have you played any Squad Leader and the associated gamettes at all, or you went straight into ASL?
So I played squad leader with my brother a long time ago as kids growing up in New York.
Hmm.
But we didn't really understand it much, and for us, it was just an opportunity to advance from Green Army men to Green Army men in combat form or in cardboard counter form, and I was intrigued by the maps and just the idea that we had machine guns and things like that. But I played it a little bit in college with a guy who lived down the hallway from me, and he must have been playing with somebody else because he routinely beat my butt. But I learned a little bit from him. I bought the whole ASL system before I joined the military and headed off to Germany for my first stint back in '85. I had started to buy whatever was available at the time.
Hmm.
But when I got to Germany, I didn't bring it with me. And I brought it with me, but there was just nobody there to play.
Hmm.
So I held on to it for quite some time, just sort of sitting there, pushing counters around on my own, having just a good time sort of dorking around with it. And then when my stint in the army was up in Germany, I went back to Washington, D.C., which is where my family was lived at. And I was cleaning out my basement. I went to go throw away my ASL stuff, and I logged into eBay to see if it was worth anything before I tossed it. And I saw, it's selling, and it's selling pretty good, so people must still be interested. And then I did a search for local ASL groups inside of DC, and I bounced into the DC conscripts, and there was a pretty thriving community in DC at the time. It wasn't uncommon for us to get 25, 30 people out to a game day, with 15 games taking place or so. And so that's how I got back into it. And that was like, I don't know, 91 or 92. And, I've played pretty much, until maybe 3 years ago, I played about 100 games a year, anywhere between 50 and 100 games a year. My
Interesting.
my closest opponent, until he moved away and I moved away, used to be Gary Fortenberry, and he and I played quite a bit, like a lot.
Yeah. Unlike me, I grew an attachment to Squad Leader and COI, and haven't in the in while I had it in storage in a plastic vat near my workplace. I noticed a starter kit one available, and then they also put starter kit 2 on the shelf, and I bought starter kit 3 online, I believe, and didn't open
Right.
them up until very recently. So I went from Squad Leader and Cross of Iron to starter kit, and then only 2 years ago I started playing Advanced Squad Leader with Advanced Shabot. So there is a bit of
Right.
confusion with all the rule sets that
Right.
that
Yeah,
I learned.
that doesn't surprise me because I mean I liked Squad Leader and I thought it was fun, but this the part about it that became tedious was that the rules changed from Squad Leader to Cross of Iron, and then when you got Crescendo, there was still yet another rule book, and you had to throw away some of those and whatnot. And then GI came along, and by the time GI got here, I thought, even as a young kid looking at GI, thinking to myself, man, this could use for a real rewrite.
Mm.
Because it just got so confusing at that point, and you didn't know. It was hard to tell what rules were in play and what rules weren't in play, and a lot of times sitting down at the table would be negotiating what book we're using and what book we're not using. Um,
So long
and,
story
and, and
short,
as much,
sorry for interrupting.
yeah,
Mm, sorry, you can
yeah, no
continue.
worries.
Yeah.
Well, the
So
only thing I was going to say is the biggest difference, and I think the thing that makes ASL work more than any game I've ever played is the defensive fire phase, and the fact that both players are sort of interacting at that time. I mean, you've played AS or SL, so you know what it's like, right? You move all your stuff and you put your little targets down, and then you move everybody back to this position, and you play penetration, and you play all this other stuff, and it got to be really tedious to sort of keep track of everything. Whereas in this, I shoot as I go along. I have rate of fire stuff rather than penetration. I have fire lanes rather than penetration. Rather than worrying about what moved through there or how many things moved there, I put residual down. It clearly simplified the game, and in my opinion, made it better.
yeah, I still play COI, and I think you just described well the reason why people that still have an attachment to the old game should move on. And we're not saying we're not. I don't think we're saying that John Hill invented a horrible game. He invented a great game. But if you want clarity and something that has been rewritten and improved since GI Anvil of Victory, ASL is the way to go. And
Yeah, I mean, ASL is an investment of time, though. There's no doubt about it. I mean, it is a complex game. You can probably play 80% of your games with 20% of the rules. If you know Chapter A fairly solidly and Chapter B fairly solidly, you can probably play quite a bit. But, when you start talking about, the steps and how you get into it and whatnot, it can be a little bit challenging. But I don't know. It became intuitive.
mhm,
The way I learned ASL, remember going back to that 93 period of time or 92 when I first started playing it again. Um, I played roughly 50 to 100 games having never really read the rule book. I would read just enough of the pieces I needed and then rely on my opponent. And then I was of an opinion that it was better to play than it was to spend time reading while I was at the table playing. And then after having done whatever that number was, someplace between 50 and 100, then I sat down to read the rule book and actually try to learn it. And at that point in time, I had enough experience under my belt. I could wrap a rule that I was like, what does this mean exactly? Back to a situation at the table, and I could say, oh, okay, now I remember what was going on, or I did this wrong, or we got that wrong. or we got that right, or whatnot. And that's what really helped me a lot. And then, like I said, having somebody there to help me in the ASL group back in DC, right? John Slotwinski, Bill Stoppel, Jim Mell, uh, John. Gosh, I can see him, Big John, right? Bob O'Connor, Mark Genberg when he was still alive. There were lots of people there that could help that could help us learn, and it was such a thriving community that it was an easy game for me to learn because of all the people that were there to help.
Pretty interesting facts. One last question.
Sure.
Um, I'm sure you had some rule controversies throughout your time playing ASL. Is there one that was very memorable, and how did you manage to resolve it with your opponent?
Define controversy.
When both adversaries cannot agree on the interpretation of a rule.
So for the most part, I've never really had that as an issue per se. And if it's been at the table, the ASL rulebook, tells you how to deal with it. You roll the die and you get on with life. If you can't agree with it, if it's at a tournament, you can appeal to the tournament director and allow them to decide it for you, and then you just have to abide by that decision. For the most part, I've never really run into that too terribly. Every now and then you disagree with stuff, and that's just, that's the nature of the world.
Yeah.
It's a complex game. There's going to be disagreements on occasion. You just have to see what shakes out. You have to listen to what the other guy is saying with an open mind, because maybe he is right, maybe you are wrong. And so you just kind of got to do the best you can. I once gave somebody a piece of advice and told them that there's actually two games going on in the ASL when you sit down to play a game. There's a game of me against you, and that's what we're trying to do, and both of us have to be happy about the experience. So I try, and I'm not perfect at it, but I try to not whine. I try to not ruin your experience, because if you're winning, you deserve to win, and if you're losing, then you deserve to lose. But you don't need me kicking you in the teeth because my luck is going bad, or something's going wrong, right? And so that's one of the things that I try to keep in mind. And then the other thing that I try to tell people is in addition to the you versus me, there's us versus the game going on as well, because it is such a complex game. Not everybody's going to remember every SAN or every rule or everything that goes on, and you have to try to help each other get the rules right. And sometimes that means you end up almost feeling like you're playing yourself because your opponent just doesn't know the rules. And sometimes it doesn't, right? And sometimes you're getting schooled. It's just, the things that you kind of got to keep in mind. And once you realize that there's those two games going on, and that especially the second game where it's us against the game, it becomes much more of a community at that point, and much more collaborative as you're trying to do the best you can. And then just trying to have fun at it, trying to have the strongest game you can, trying to do the best you can to play as well as you can. Sometimes you're going to win and sometimes you're going to lose, and every now and then you get a draw, but that's not very often.
It's a gentleman's sport. I completely agree with you wholeheartedly, and that's something I think I tried to portray in a previous video. And I'm certainly going to put a link to your blog and the video description that I'm going to upload to YouTube. And
Okay.
I thank you greatly for your time. I think I learned a lot, and the viewers that stuck around for the until the end of this video will certainly learn a lot. Um, Certainly, we should have another chat again. I would highly recommend that you also do a podcast if possible. Um,
I've thought about doing the podcast sort of thing. It's just not my gig. I'm happy doing what I do on the blog of mine. I mean, I've been asked a couple of times by folks, why don't I publish these in like a journal? And while I don't have anything against the journals, I don't have anything against a third party publisher who publishes. I think those guys keep the hobby alive.
mm,
They're just too slow. they're too slow to market, and I just don't want to write an article this week that gets published next January. It's just there's no sense in it to me. And then on top of that, I had an article in Journal 9 from MMP, and I made a mistake in the article. And I bear responsibility for it. But when you write rules dense articles like I do, you're going to make a mistake, right? And that article was proofed by you name the people that are respected proofreaders and respected players in the community, and it was proofed, and we all missed it, But you got published, and then 30 minutes after it was out on the street, somebody come back and said, "Hey, there's an error in your article," and now I can't fix it. And so that was the other lesson I learned through print medium. By keeping stuff on my blog like I do, I can fix it. If someone calls me and says, "Hey, there's an error," I can acknowledge the error right up front, talk about it on my blog, or talk about it, in a post someplace about the mistake I made, and fix it, and make people aware that there's a change to the article, and give credit to the person who found it, right? And I don't have this article sitting in Journal 9 that's got an error in it, 10 years ago that I made that I just can't fix. So I have no issues with third-party productions. I have no issues with putting things in the journal and the magazines. I think those things are great. I think it's they're they keep the hobby alive, and that's fantastic. But for me personally, I just need the flexibility to be able to fix my own mistakes, because even though I do have them proofed, I own those mistakes. And I want to make sure that I can fix them for the people who read them and enjoy what I write. And that's what it comes down to for me. So that's why I started my blog, was to have that place to write and that outlet since I retired in March this year, of being able to write articles, take risks, because writing on rules dense articles are a risk, because as I said earlier, you're going to get something wrong. It's inevitable. There's nothing you can do about it. A Q&A is going to change something, or you're going to have the wrong interpretation. Someone's going to read it and put a Q&A in, and that's just the way the world goes. And the only person out there that's infallible on the rules is Perry, and that's only because he can instantly say that's errata. Right? If he thinks he made a mistake, say, "Oh, that's errata." Right? And so that gives him the right to be infallible. But the rest of us, we have to be careful. And so I do the best I can with what I have available. I have a lot of good people proofing it. But I've got a big article that I've been writing on prisoners that's going to run probably 20 pages, and I'm kind of dreading releasing it, because I know the minute I release it, there'll be something in it that's wrong, because it's such a poorly written section of the rules that it's going to be hard to get it all right. But somebody has to do it, because it's such a poorly understood section of the rules. And if I can, by now, you hear people say, "Well, they're prisoners, I just kill them because I don't have to deal with them." And to me, that's just something begging for a little education. I'm not saying that's not the right idea sometimes. I'm not saying that's not the right answer sometimes. But to reflexively say that, to me, is just a mistake.
Well, I thank you for setting me straight and agreeing to do this video. I think I rarely edit my videos. I don't have time to edit and do anything more than post a link on Discord or Facebook. But I thank you. I really appreciate your time, and I have a lot to be thankful for on Thanksgiving Day. But this is certainly a really great gift to me and to the community, and I thank you again.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I don't have a problem. And if anybody has any topics that they think we should write about or don't understand, then I'd appreciate the lead on that, because I'm always looking for something to write on. So same for you. And then again, if you, again, allowing for the 6-hour time difference, if you wanted to play this one here and see the German attack that I would do, then let me know. And I would happily attack and try to walk you through what it is I'm thinking about and how it is I'm playing it.
Sure stuff.
It's up to you.
I'm
All right,
gonna
sir.
stop recording, but don't get off the line, okay?
Okay.